The truth about menopause is that we don't have to feel like poop, because I'm not allowed to curse. So that's the truth about menopause. We don't have to feel as crappy as many of us do. Now, obviously, we're going to get old and obviously our hormones are going to change, but we don't have to feel old. Part of aging, of course, has to do with hormones, and it happens slowly and we barely notice. And then one day we just wake up feeling older, right? I think many of you will resonate with that. Like, ever since I turned 50 or whatever your number is, you just suddenly feel older. You feel tired, you feel weak, you feel old. Maybe you feel more depressed and moody. And here's the thing, you turn around to your friends who are around your age group and they're feeling about the same thing. They're complaining about the same thing. So then you start thinking to yourself, well, this must be normal because everyone's feeling this way. So I'm here to tell you that these symptoms are common, but they're not normal. It doesn't mean you have to accept them. And getting your hormones in balance is the key to aging well. So today we're going to talk about balancing your hormones, what you need to know about your hormones, and what you need to know before considering any hormone replacement therapy. Let's start talking about menopause. So some definitions. What does that mean? So typically a woman goes into menopause somewhere between 45 and 55. There is, of course, some variations. And menopause basically means that you counted 12 full months without your period. And that's important because sometimes you can skip 3 months and 4 months, but 12 full months is menopause. But the years prior to menopause is called perimenopause. And that could be 6 years, it could be 13 years. Everyone's a little bit different, but those are the years before, and they are a little tricky sometimes in how you feel as well. Every woman is different, but I just wanted to let you know what those definitions mean because there's a lot of confusion there. Now, I know most of you are here. When you hear the word hormones, you're saying, okay, I'm ready for it. I'm ready for the sex talk. And I don't mean the sex talk, because hopefully you had that by this point, but the sex hormones talk. You want to hear about estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. And of course, we're going to talk about that. But when we talk about hormone balance, we actually don't start with the sex hormones. We have to talk about all the hormones in the body. We have to talk about all the major hormones. So I promise you, I'm going to get to the sex talk, the sex hormones, but it doesn't make sense to fix the sex hormones if your other hormones are out of whack. So fixing all of your hormones is super important. And I promise you, we're going to get to the sex hormones as well. So let's start. The very first hormone that you have to fix is insulin. And I don't know if you knew that insulin is a hormone, but it is. And if that's out of whack, everything is out of whack. It messes up your sex hormones. It affects your testosterone levels. It affects something called sex hormone binding globulin. It just affects downstream all the sex hormones. So we have to fix it from above. And we're not going to get into the whole pathway of how it affects hormones, but it absolutely does. So basically, if you're diabetic or insulin resistant, you have to fix this first. Quick talk about insulin resistant in case you have missed some of my talks. Insulin resistance happens years before you're diabetic. So if you're going every year to your doctor's office and they're like, you're not diabetic, you're not diabetic, you're not diabetic, that's great. That's awesome. But that doesn't mean you're not insulin resistant. And insulin resistance is really important. It's the years before diabetes. It's the body really kind of grappling with all the extra carbs that you have. And I did a whole talk about it on TikTok in one of my episodes. But it is an inflammatory state, and it means that your insulin is not balanced. So if you are here seeing me locally, I do this test on all of my patients. But if you don't have a way of getting tested for it, I'm just going to tell you this. If you know that your eating is a little bit off and maybe you have a few extra pounds, maybe you know your cholesterol is a little bit elevated, I'm going to tell you, you're very likely that you're already insulin resistant, even without the fancy test. So the first thing you have to do is fix that. And of course, if you're diabetic, we have to get that under control first before we even begin the sex hormones. So you want to clean this up first, lower your carbs, increase the movement, do all the classic things. By the way, side note, if we're already talking about nutrition for this age group, don't forget to add protein to your life to build muscle, because in this age group, this is a bit of a side note, but I want to mention it. In our age group, we have a tendency to lose muscle. And part of that is because we don't eat enough protein. So make sure as you're cleaning up your diet for insulin resistance, that protein is part of that conversation. So get your nutritional house in order first. Fixing your insulin levels is critical to balancing the rest of your hormones. That's going to bring us to the next hormone, which is your adrenals. And if you've been listening to me on TikTok or watching any of my videos, you know I talk a lot about adrenal fatigue. And adrenals, again, if we don't have the adrenals going, we don't have the rest of it going. During perimenopause and menopause, sometimes women will feel more irritable. You might notice you have trouble sleeping. You might feel more anxious. You might have a harder time calming down. For some women, it's a time for hot flashes. These are all symptoms that we associate with perimenopause and menopause. But a lot of it has to do with balancing our adrenal glands. So before we run for hormone replacement therapy, we have to fix your adrenals. So one of the jobs of the adrenals is to create cortisol. And again, if you watch my adrenal fatigue video, I explain all that. Now, this gets a little technical, but cortisol, if cortisol is on this side and your sex hormones are on this side, both of them start with cholesterol. So you have cholesterol, then it breaks down to something called pregnenolone, and then it makes a choice. Am I going to make a sex hormone or am I going to make cortisol? And if you're more stressed, more of that ingredient is going to go to make cortisol and to deal with your stress. So you can see that fixing your adrenals and managing your stress has a huge effect on your sex hormones. So that is the first thing that has to be fixed before we talk about progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. Super important that we get our adrenal house in order. And adrenal fatigue, the symptoms of adrenal fatigue, which I've talked about, actually sound like hormonal issues, like perimenopausal issues, the fatigue, the weight gain, the brain fog, the aches and pains. That's not necessarily a sex hormone talk. Those are all symptoms of adrenal fatigue. So again, we want to fix that before we move on. And then next, you want to fix your thyroid. That is super important. You want to fix your thyroid. Again, if we don't fix that, we can't fix the rest of it. And I've said it once and I've said it a million times. TSH alone is not enough of a test. You cannot use a TSH alone. So if you're going for your annual and your doc, who's very well-meaning, is just running your TSH, it is not giving you the full picture of your thyroid. Because you might say to me, my thyroid's fine. E, why are you even talking to me about it? I'm here for the menopause talk. Why are you talking to me about thyroid? Because you may not know that you have a thyroid issue cooking if the only thing you're testing is TSH. TSH is just one hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone. You have T4, you have T3, you have reverse T3. So all of those have to be tested. And you must test for antibodies, because antibodies to thyroid, you can have antibodies to thyroid years before you actually have a thyroid issue. So antibodies, I read this somewhere where they called antibodies to thyroid your check engine light before there's an issue. Okay. So if you have antibodies to thyroid, it's a check engine light letting you know, hey, you're going to have a thyroid issue coming up soon, and let's start fixing it now. So super important that you get on top of it and figure out if you have an issue, and if you do, fix it. Supplements, lifestyle. So again, what I'm saying is you might be walking around feeling fatigued, gaining weight, depressed, thinking that it's all perimenopause or menopause, when in fact you might be walking around with a thyroid issue. So we want to fix that first. Okay, I think I made my point. And you might be saying, all right, E, I'm already like a few minutes into this. I got it. I need to fix my insulin levels. I'm working on my adrenals. My thyroid is optimized. I'm eating right. I'm sleeping right. I'm taking the right supplements. Now, can we please get to the hormones that we know about, the sex hormones? And the answer is, of course. Now we're ready. So we're going to talk about hormone replacement therapy, right? Because let's just say you fixed all those things, you're optimized, and you still have certain symptoms that you're thinking, well, maybe I should get a hormone replacement therapy. This is the moment I want to give you a little bit of an education of what that means, hormone replacement therapy, and what's available out there, because not all of them are the same. Now, this is a short talk, so I'm obviously not going into it. I could talk about this for hours, but this is an overview. The first thing I want to tell you about is the difference between HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy, and BHRT. which is bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And I think just by the name alone, you probably already know which one I'm leaning towards. Hormone replacement therapy, HRT. Simply put, this is the stuff you don't want. Okay. Generally speaking, anything you've heard about negatively about hormone replacement therapy is your classic HRT. I'm going to explain to you. So if you've heard about, bad outcomes or heart attacks or cancers, it's from HRT. Classically, a patient will go to the GYN and say, hey, I'm really suffering from hot flashes. And they will give you something called Premarin. Premarin, it's supposed to be estrogen, or Prempro, which is Premarin, supposed to be estrogen. I'll tell you what I mean by that. And Pro, which is supposed to be progesterone. So Premarin is actually estrogen made out of horse urine. Okay, it is not bioidentical to human estrogen. And Prempro is Premarin, horse urine, together with something called Provera, which is supposed to be like progesterone, but it isn't. Okay, that is what classic HRT looks like these days. There's some older versions that don't exist, but these days. These are both very high dosages of the horse estrogen and Provera, and they have a boatload of side effects. That's the HRT that a lot of you might have heard about and said to yourself, I don't think I want that. And you're right, I don't want that either. Then there's the world of BHRT, bioidentical hormone therapy, which is super important. If you're going to go down this road, you have to find someone who uses BHRT if you're considering replacements. They're still man-made. They're not naturally found. They're still man-made, but they're designed chemically, molecularly to look and act like human hormones, not horse hormones. And they are dosed very, very low, and they are custom made to each patient in a compounding pharmacy to keep you in line with what you should be. So without going into too much detail here, here's what you need to know. If you're reading studies, you want to get educated, you're going online and you're reading studies and you want to see what's going on, make sure that when you're reading the studies, you pay attention to which studies are done with HRT and which studies are done with BHRT, because you will have completely different conclusions. So any of the adverse effects that you're talking about are with synthetic hormones, especially the ones given orally, are the ones that have concerning issues with cancer and blood clots, etc. However, when you read the studies on BHRT, not only do you see that they're safer, but they actually help replace the levels that you're missing, and they're actually protective against bone loss, heart issues, and even certain cancers. So again, when you read the articles, make sure that you really know what kind of hormone replacement therapy is being used for the study that you're reading. You'd be surprised. Which brings me now to the second part of the hormone replacement conversation, which is, what does that mean to have hormone replacement? What does it mean? What do I do? Do I take it if I have symptoms? Do I just take it if I have hot flashes? When do I take it? So I'm of the school of thought that you be on BHRT for protective reasons, not just for symptoms. Again, assuming you've done all the work, making sure there's no contraindications, right? I'm not telling everyone to go out and get it. What I am saying is, if you're considering BHRT, it's not just for symptoms. It actually has a protective effect. So even if you're feeling amazing, it's something to consider because of its protection. And I'll explain to you what that means. Bioidentical hormone therapy is about giving back into the system what is missing to achieve a balance, so that even if you're stressed, if you have things going on, you still have this balance going on. It's about measuring and giving back to your identical levels. It's not overdosing. It's not giving you more than you need. Which brings me to the next point, which is, how do I know how much I need? How are you going to know how to dose me? Which is really important, because again, if you go to GYN, there's pretty much one dose. It comes in a pack. If you go to CVS to get your hormones, there's like 1 or 2 doses out there. That's it. It's not really custom tailored. But when it comes to BHRT, which if you're looking for a BHRT provider, what we do and what I recommend that you find if you don't work with us is someone that does saliva testing for hormones over blood testing. And that's a long conversation as to why, but you have Google and you'll see why. And you want to find someone who's then going to test your levels, which are going to be different than your neighbors. And then they're going to order specific creams and sometimes progesterone pills, but creams and pills specifically to the dosage that your body needs, which is going to be very different than your friends. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest myths in menopause. And one of the biggest myths is that menopause is about estrogen deficiency, right? Again, you go to the GYN, you say, I'm feeling some type of way, and they give you estrogen, they give you Premarin. So there's a conversation out there that after menopause, what happens is that our estrogen goes down, and that's the problem. If we just put the estrogen back in, everything will be fine. We're led to believe that the slightest symptoms, you run out, you go to GYN, they give you an estrogen replacement, and then you're all good. But the truth is that yes, estrogen levels, of course, decrease during menopause. However, it doesn't mean we have an estrogen deficiency, because at the same time, we're also losing progesterone, and progesterone and estrogen balance each other. So yes, estrogen goes down a little, but your progesterone goes down a lot. And now what happens is that you're actually in a state of estrogen dominance, not deficiency. So loading you up with more estrogen is not going to help. So there's supposed to be this balance. I'm just going to say it again, between estrogen and progesterone. And in menopause, progesterone goes down. Estrogen becomes dominant relative to progesterone. Yes, it's less than what it was pre-menopause, but relative to progesterone, it suddenly dominates. And now the symptoms that you're feeling is not from estrogen deficiency. It's from estrogen dominance. And that is the whole perimenopausal state. So by the time a woman actually gets to menopause, she usually has more estrogen than she needs, because this is classically the typical patient. There are some outliers, but if you have a little bit of excess body fat, which many of us do, that fat actually converts to estrogen. So you already have enough estrogen. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're stressed out, that means also progesterone goes low and you might have more estrogen from the stress. And we are constantly exposed to estrogen from the environment: pesticides, styrofoam, plastics, to-go containers that we microwave, receipt paper. So by the time we get to menopause, the likelihood that you're actually suffering from estrogen deficiency is pretty small. Now, there are some outliers in smaller, thinner women who lead a certain lifestyle. So sometimes it is an estrogen deficiency. But for most of us, it's an estrogen dominance issue. So again, going into your GYN and getting estrogen for it is not going to fix it. I hope it's clear by now that the symptoms of menopause is not an issue of too little estrogen, but too much of it. What's actually happening in menopause is that you're losing your progesterone and you have to balance out the estrogen. Women with estrogen excess, or another way of looking at it, progesterone deficiency, will complain of, and tell me if this sounds familiar, breast tenderness, hot flashes, depression, anxiety, fatigue, weight gain, difficulty sleeping. Sound familiar? Yeah, those are all symptoms of estrogen excess, not deficiency. And if it wasn't enough that you're feeling a certain way, one of the reasons that as we get older, women are more likely to have like heart attacks and strokes is because of this estrogen dominance. So now we're at a higher risk for cancer. We're at a higher risk for blood clots. We're at a higher risk of osteoporosis and heart issues, all because of the estrogen dominance, not deficiency. So when a woman comes into GYN and says, I'm having hot flashes, and do you see now why giving Premarin is not going to work? Again, Premarin, read horse pee. And you might say, well, that's okay, because my GYN didn't give me Premarin. My GYN thought about that and gave me Prempro, which is Premarin, and Provera, because she thought about that. But I just want you to know that Provera is not a natural progesterone, and it creates its own mess, and make sure you read about it. The bottom line is that neither of these pharmaceuticals are going to help your symptoms or decrease your risk of heart, bone, clotting issues. Okay. So menopause is not an estrogen deficiency issue. It's really about balancing estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, which I promise you I'll get to as well. Testosterone was part of this conversation also, which no one talks about in the GYN world. No one talks about your testosterone, but testosterone is responsible for vaginal dryness, bone loss, depression, increased fat, loss of lean mass, low assertiveness, sleep disturbances, decreased libido, fatigue, foggy mind, aging skin, aches and pains. Sound familiar? That could be because your testosterone is low. Testosterone is important, not just for these symptoms, but again, it helps balance estrogen, kind of progesterone helps balance estrogen, so does testosterone. And so it protects the bones. And it also, because it balances estrogen, it lowers your cardiovascular risk. So all of this is super important. I hope we're getting so far that this myth of estrogen deficiency, I know I said it a lot, but it's one that really resonates with me. So a quick recap. When we talk about hormone replacement therapy, first of all, it should be bioidentical and not horse urine. And by the way, when I say estrogen, I didn't get into it, but I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that there's not just one kind of estrogen. There's E1, there's E2, there's E3. I'm not going to get into it, but make sure you get the E2 and the E3 correctly. You have to, and testosterone and progesterone. Okay. It's not just estrogen. It's balancing all of it. So first thing you have to do is fix your insulin, fix your adrenals, fix your thyroid. Then you have to do a saliva test to determine what you actually need, because it's not one size fits all. Then you get someone who's going to compound it for you, either transdermally or sublingually. I'm not a huge fan of pellets because it's hard to dose and manage and change once they're under your skin. And this is how you get to correctly balance your hormones. And I know if this is a lot and I gave you a lot of information, you're always welcome to work with us. You can reach us on any platform at The New Method or at thenewmethod.com, everywhere except for Twitter because I talk too much. At the end of the day, reach us anywhere you want, private message us. We are going to answer wherever platform you come in from. But no matter what, I hope this helped so that you can become a game changer in your life because, say it with me now, you always knew there was a better way. I'll talk to you